Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another brand new episode of the Word of the Day podcast, where useful words are pleasantly explained. My name is Jamie Silva, I am your host, and I am excited to be back here behind the mic once again with a couple very cool words on the docket today. These two words, both of which are adjectives, are related, and they have short, simple definitions. They are culinary, which you can also say as culinary, though I don't, and this means of or pertaining to cooking, and sartorial, which means of or pertaining to clothes or fashion. And pertaining just means to be related, relevant, or applicable to something. Pertain is where we get the adjective form pertinent, which logically means relevant or applicable to something. This is almost a synonym of apropos, if you think back to episode 85. So, for example, you might say that seeds and suet are very pertinent, or apropos, to the question of how to bring all the birds to the yard. Anyway, so just to quickly note the Google definitions for these words, the one for culinary goes of or for cooking, and the one for sartorial goes relating to tailoring, clothes, or style of dress. And the etymology reinforces these meanings. Culinary comes from the Latin culinarius, meaning pertaining to the kitchen, and culinarius in turn derived from the Latin noun culina, meaning kitchen, cooking stove, or food. It seems kind of odd to have one word mean all those things. Like, it sounds as if you could say you were cooking the culina on the culina in the culina, meaning you were cooking the food on the cooking stove in the kitchen, aka the cooking room. But I'm sure the Romans found a way to clearly communicate these culinary distinctions somehow. Moving along to the etymology for sartorial, this came from the Latin word sartor, meaning tailor, which of course is someone who mends or alters clothes, or alternatively, it's the verb meaning to mend or alter clothes. Literally, in Latin, sartor meant patcher or mender. Now, sartorial and culinary are part of a category of words I like to call of or pertaining to words. I've also heard them described in one or two spots as adjectival vocabulary, like vocabulary that's intended for adjectives, but also isn't just an adjective. It's a little confusing, but for lack of a better term, let's just stick with of or pertaining to words. These words can refer to anything about this or that subject, thing, area, topic, whatever. It's very broad. A lot of these words you use already all the time, I'm sure. So musical, as an adjective, can mean just of or pertaining to music. Architectural, relating to architecture. Military, pertaining to armed forces. Automotive, relating to cars/autos. Emotional, relating to emotion. Cultural, relating to culture. Linguistic, about or pertaining to language or the study thereof, and so on. There's so many of these. Many of them have more than one sense, or are also nouns. Like, you can refer to the military or going to a musical. But in the senses we're talking about today, these words really become useful when they modify nouns, because they help you say things that would otherwise be very difficult to express or describe. Enough theory, though. Let's see what this looks like in practice. So I'll just run through a few examples using the words I just listed. So, Eleanor showed great musical ability at a young age. The Roman Colosseum is an ancient architectural wonder. The Ducks marched across the lawn with military precision. Kelly carried a lot of emotional baggage. Stan was mostly ignorant of automotive matters, so he never tried to fix his car himself when it broke down. And lastly, some say the Word of the Day podcast is a cultural and linguistic treasure. You get the picture. In each of these sentences, you have the main nouns, ability, wonder, precision, baggage, matters, and treasure. And preceding them, you have these terms that tell you what sort of ability, wonder, etc. they are, what category they fit into, which is essential to the meaning. Like, calling the Colosseum an ancient wonder is fine, but modifying wonder with architectural is more specific, it's more descriptive. Likewise, Eleanor showing great ability at a young age is very vague, whereas musical ability tells you where her talents particularly lie. And for a couple, the adjective changes the meaning entirely. If you say Stan was mostly ignorant of matters, leaving out automotive, that makes it sound like he's uninformed about everything. Kelly carrying around a lot of baggage sounds like she's going on a big trip and could use a hand with her luggage. Emotional baggage is its own thing, obviously, and it hinges on everyone understanding that emotional can mean of or pertaining to emotion. Next, let's apply this same logic to sartorial and culinary by applying these adjectives to a bunch of nouns. So I might say, I started taking a cooking class in order to improve my culinary skills. That, of course, means my skills related to cooking. And actually, that class could be taking place at culinary school, where I'm studying culinary arts. And those are both real culinary industry terms, by the way. Or what about this? Melvin knew he had no fashion sense, so he followed his wife's guidance on sartorial topics, like which tie goes with which shirt, and whether brown dress shoes were still in style. Sartorial matters, of course, is just stuff relating to clothing/fashion, and X plus matters is a really common formulation or phrase that you're going to see with this type of adjective. Now, once you know this adjective plus noun template, these words become quite easy to use, and you can toss them around willy-nilly. Now, there are a ton of very obscure cousins of sartorial and culinary that are kind of fun as language trivia, but most of them, I think, are either too fancy or too niche to feature on the show. Here are a few, though, just in case you're interested. Avian, relating to birds. Nautical, relating to sailors or ships or other ocean and sailing things. Apian, relating to bees, not apes, that would be simian. Ocular, pertaining to vision or eyes. Horticultural, pertaining to gardening. Lexical, pertaining to words or vocabulary. Jurisprudential, relating to the law or a set of laws. And one could also just say legal instead. Or judicial, though actually that one's a bit more about courts specifically. And as long as we're on the subject, we've asked Nadia, the lead counsel of the Word of the Day legal team, to weigh in on how often she uses the word jurisprudential. Nadia, welcome.
Hi, Jamie. Yeah, I use it all the time.
Oh, really?
Indeed. So does my whole team. 4 times thus far today, and it's not even lunchtime.
Amazing. Could you go ahead and use it in a sentence just as an example for the folks?
Sure. So, let's see. Here's a snippet from a recent letter we sent to someone who's threatening to sue the show. Quote, "We, the undersigned, do hereby certify and attest that the recipients of this letter have no jurisprudential know-how whatsoever and would be wise to withdraw their claim before we extract a large settlement for frivolous litigation."
Wow, great usage. Also, a lawsuit about the show? Should I be worried?
Nah, don't worry. We're taking care of it.
As always, you guys are the best. But I'm curious, how exactly are you taking care of it?
Mostly through this letter. Basically, no one keeps pursuing a lawsuit once you demonstrate that you know how to use the word jurisprudential.
Oh, of course. That totally makes sense. Well, thanks so much, Nadia. I really appreciate you stopping by.
Anytime. Oh, and by the way, maybe tell producer Pete to stop licensing the show merchandise to third-party vendors without permission. It's a copyright nightmare.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's not okay at all. I'll speak to him about that. Okay, well, thanks again, Nadia. Keep up the great work, okay?
You got it.
Folks, that's Nadia. Don't know what we'd do without her. Okay, moving along with our list of this sort of word, there's professorial, relating to professors, or in another sense, characteristic or reminiscent of professors. And finally, there's pecuniary, meaning relating to money. This, by the way, is the root of the word impecunious, which we covered in episode 35, and means feeling like you're low on funds and shouldn't spend too much money, perhaps because you recently made a big purchase. Crucially, how much money you have has next to no bearing on whether you can or would feel impecunious. It's all in your head. Okay, it's now time to get some examples of how to use sartorial and culinary in ordinary conversation or writing. And we're going to do more examples than usual because I think it's important to get an impression of just how flexible and innovative you can be with these words. Starting off with culinary. Example number 1. When smoke started wafting from his oven, Connor noticed immediately and pulled out the garlic bread before it got burnt to a crisp, thus narrowly averting a culinary catastrophe. That example, by the way, was inspired by a true incident from college involving a housemate named Connor, a garlic bread that caught on fire while being broiled in the oven, and I think we still ate the garlic bread. So details are a little murky, but I'm pretty sure all of that happened. I did check with Connor, by the way, and he replied, quote, "That is character defamation. No incident like that ever occurred," unquote. So It sounds like there may be a defamation suit in the works there, but that's fine. I don't mind. I forwarded that to Nadia, and she's all over it, I'm sure.
I'm on it. Jurisprudential.
Example number 2. Portland's newest brunch spot, named Around the World in 80 Plates, proudly serves dishes from dozens of countries. Every dining experience here, declares a sign in the window, is a one-of-a-kind culinary adventure. Example number 3 comes from Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. And this is from a part where Anne has been looking forward to baking a cake for an upcoming dinner party. Quote, Wednesday morning came. Anne got up at sunrise because she was too excited to sleep. She had caught a severe cold in the head by reason of her dabbling in the spring on the preceding evening, but nothing short of absolute pneumonia could have quenched her interest in culinary matters that morning. After breakfast, she proceeded to make her cake. Unquote. Example number 4 comes from Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Quote, While the cooking mania lasted, Meg went through Mrs. Cornelius's recipe book as if it were a mathematical exercise, working out the problems with patience and care. Sometimes her family were invited in to help eat up a too bounteous feast of success, or Lottie would be privately dispatched with a batch of failures, which were to be concealed from all eyes in the convenient stomachs of the impoverished family next door. An evening with John, Meg's husband, over the account books, usually produced a temporary lull in her culinary enthusiasm, and a frugal fit would ensue. And, quick sidebar here, what Alcott is saying is that Meg would feel impecunious after she and her husband went over their bills. Back to where we were. And a frugal fit would ensue, during which the poor man was put through a course of bread pudding, hash, and warmed-over coffee, which tried his soul, although he bore it with praiseworthy fortitude. Unquote. Oh look, there's praiseworthy. We talked about that in our last episode on lackluster. And finally, example number 5 comes from the book Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens, slightly edited for clarity and brevity. And by the way, speaking of Dickens, there is a word, an adjective, that is precisely in the vein of sartorial and culinary and all these other ones we've talked about today. And it's based on Dickens. It's just Dickensian. This means, and I'll go to the Google here, quote, of or reminiscent of the novels of Charles Dickens, especially in suggesting the poor social conditions or comically repulsive characters that they portray. For example, the back streets of Dickensian London, unquote. Pretty cool. Anyway, so this comes from a part where Bella, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Wilfer, insists on cooking an anniversary dinner for them, over the protests of Mrs. Wilfer, who had been planning to prepare it herself. Quote, Now, Ma, said Bella, reappearing in the kitchen, you think me fit for nothing, but I intend to prove the contrary. I mean to be cook today. Hold, rejoined her majestic mother. I cannot permit it. Cook in that dress? As for my dress, Ma, returned Bella, merrily searching in a dresser drawer, I mean to apron it and towel it all over the front, and as to permission, I mean to do without. You cook? Said Mrs. Wilfer. You, who never cooked when you were at home. Yes, Ma, returned Bella, that is precisely the state of the case. Now, what's first? First, said Mrs. Wilfer, with a wave of her gloves, expressive of abdication under protest from the culinary throne, I would recommend examination of the bacon in the saucepan on the fire, and also of the potatoes by the application of a fork. Preparation of the greens will further become necessary if you persist in this unseemly demeanor. Unquote. I really like this example because it shows just how creative you can be with culinary and other words of this nature. And abdication, for those unaware, refers to a monarch giving up a throne, or to a person giving up a responsibility or duty. And if you were unaware, by the way, that means that you either didn't listen to or have forgotten episode 62. So, back to the thread here, Charles Dickens could have said, Mrs. Wilfer reluctantly let Bella cook dinner. Instead, far more elegantly and verbosely, he says, to quote again, that she waved her gloves in an expression of abdication under protest from the culinary throne. Amazing. Next, let's do some examples for sartorial. Example number 1. Burton enjoyed some notoriety at school for his bold, if somewhat incoherent, sartorial choices. Today, he decided to go with what he called a thrift store special. Army boots, heavily distressed jeans, a Hawaiian shirt with a bolo tie, and a beret, and a leather jacket, and a monocle. He was expelled before noon. Example number 2. Should I wear a sport coat to this, or just a nice collared shirt? Pondered Spencer, who was prone to fits of sartorial indecision. I think a coat. No, just a shirt. No, actually, yes, a coat. I don't know. What does smart casual mean anyway? Example number 3. Why, I haven't a thing to wear, declared Amy resolutely, voicing a time-honored feeling of sartorial poverty that seemed quite at odds with the overflowing closet before her. Example number 4 comes from the book Olympian Nights by John Kendrick Bangs. Here, the speaker is explaining that the Greek gods had to wear extremely fancy clothes in order to properly reflect their importance. Quote, "The more exalted one's position, the greater the sartorial obligation," retorted Hippopotamus, and that's the actual name in the book, retorted Hippopotamus, who had a vocabulary of the most remarkable range. "Just as it happens that our king here in Greece, like His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, has to be provided with 768 suits of clothes so as to be properly clad at the variety of functions he is required to grace, so too must the gods be provided with a wardrobe of rare quality and extent." Unquote. Example number 5 comes from the book The Ne'er-Do-Well by Rex Beach. Quote, "Darwin K. Anthony and his son had quarreled. They were estranged, and the young man preferred idleness to industry. Exactly as the newspapers related, he toiled not at all. He spun nothing but excuses. He arrayed himself in sartorial glory, and he drove a yellow racing car beyond the speed limit." Unquote. Wow, sounds like a real degenerate. And finally, example number 6, which comes from The Amateur Gentleman by Geoffrey Farnell, slightly edited for clarity. Quote, "The star of Barnabas Beverly Esquire was undoubtedly rising. Thus the fashionable world turned its polite eyes to mark the course of this new luminary, and it regarded Barnabas Beverly Esquire as one to be flattered, smiled upon, and worthy of all consideration and respect. For here was one, not only young, fabulously rich, and a proved sportsman, but also a dandy, with nice taste and originality in matters sartorial, especially in waistcoats, which are fancy vests, and cravats, which are old-fashioned fancy neckties. These articles of clothing, as the fashionable world well knows, are the final gauge of a man's depth and possibilities. Thus, the waistcoats of Barnabas Beverly Esquire were to be met with any day, sunning themselves in the park, and the styles of cravat worn by Barnabas Beverly Esquire were to be observed at the most brilliant functions, bowing in all directions." Unquote. Just wow. I don't know about you, but I love that writing. Or perhaps I should say, what a remarkable feat of literary skill. Okay, folks, that'll do it for the examples, but that will not do it for today's show. Up first, it's time for another edition of Word Games, in which I share with you a word or conversation-related game/activity that you can play with your friends and family. Today's game is already a bona fide real-life board game, but I firmly believed, and this is a true story, I thought I made this game up myself when I was like 14 years old. I just called it the dictionary game, but in its official form, it's called Balderdash, and it involves writing and guessing definitions of obscure words. So here's how it works. One person will draw a card, and it'll have a fancy word on it, like, say, the word malinger, and the person will say that word aloud. Then everyone else who's playing the game will write down a plausible-sounding definition for malinger on a slip of paper, and they'll hand it to the person who read the word. After collecting the slips of paper with everyone's definitions, the person will shuffle them up while mixing in the real definition on its own slip of paper. And then they'll read all the definitions aloud. It might sound like this. Option number 1, malinger. To loiter outside a business or other dwelling with malevolent intent. Option number 2, malinger. To scratch oneself vigorously, especially in response to fleas. Option number 3, malinger. To exaggerate or feign, which means fake, illness in order to escape duty or work. And finally, option number 4, malinger. A feeling of malaise or despondency arising from excessive sloth or laziness. And there'll just be however many definitions based on however many people were playing the game. Then everyone goes around and guesses which one they think is the real definition amongst all the imposters. If you guess right, you get 2 points. For each person who mistakenly picks your definition, thinking it's the correct one, you get another point. And you just go around like that, with a new person being the card drawer and facilitator each round. And of course, this person isn't eligible to guess in that round, because they obviously know the answer. Now, again, many years before I knew about this board game, I would play this with my siblings. And instead of drawing cards, One person would just browse through a dictionary looking for cool words. They'd pick one, they'd say it, etc. And I distinctly remember malinger being selected in this form of the game, either by me or someone else, I don't recall. And the answer, by the way, the real definition, was option 3, to exaggerate or feign illness in order to escape duty or work. And then, lo and behold, probably like a decade later, malinger appeared on this very podcast, episode 41. Feel free to check it out. Okay, now I'm going to tie this all together. The reason we're featuring Balderdash, or the dictionary game, as today's activity is that it teaches you, among other things, how to write in a dictionary style, or you could say in a definition style. Players who know how to do this perform far better than those who don't. For example, if someone wrote malinger, a word describing the combination of adrenaline and a sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize you've slept through your alarm. Well, sorry, this just doesn't sound like a dictionary definition. It's too informal, too imprecise. A better version might be malinger, the physical sensation of panic and dread produced by the realization that one has overslept one's alarm. I mean, it's still a little whimsical, but sounds a lot more like a definition, right? Well, so one of the best Balderdash writing techniques that I discovered was writing of or pertaining to at the beginning of definitions, or alternatively, relating to, because that is such dictionary phrasing. Using about instead of pertaining to or relating to, it wouldn't cut it. And remember, sartorial and culinary are of or pertaining to words. Okay, folks, that'll do it for this edition of Word Games. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you enjoyed the whole show. If you did, please do consider rating and reviewing this program, this paragon of podcastular excellence, on iTunes, which helps other fans of language find us. And obviously, podcastular is not a word, but if there were a word meaning of or pertaining to podcasts, I don't know. I feel like this could work. Oh, and one other thing. If you'd like to express your appreciation for the show in your sartorial stylings, you'll find a variety of Word of the Day t-shirts and other apparel available in our online store, which you can find at wotdpodcast.com/merchandise. Okay, folks, on behalf of the entire staff here at the Word of the Day podcast, including our crack legal team, this is your host, Jamie Silva, saying so long from the RAV4 studios. We'll see you next time, and in the meanwhile, as ever, have a great